This week on the Writers Detective Bureau, coffee mugs, double jeopardy, the hiring process, and arrest warrants. I'm Adam Richardson, and this is the Writers Detective Bureau. This is episode number 24 of the Writers Detective Bureau, the podcast dedicated to helping authors and screenwriters write professional quality, crime-related fiction. If you have your own author business, consider joining Patreon. It's free for you, and it allows your readers to support you financially through monthly micropayments. Give your fans a chance to show their support by creating your own Patreon account right now. To learn more, visit writersdetective.com/Patreon, Patreon. Please join me in thanking the patrons that make this podcast possible. Joan Raymond, Guy Alton, Natasha Bajema, Natalie Borelli, Joe Trent, Siobhan Pope, Leah Cutter, Ryan Kinmill, Richard Phillips, and Robin Lyons by visiting the links to their author websites in the show notes by going to writersdetective.com/24. When I started this podcast, I gave away a few Writers Detective logo mugs through Facebook and Instagram. Well, I'm happy to say that these awesome black 15-ounce mugs that have the logo on the front and back are finally available for sale. So if you want one for yourself, the link is writersdetectivebureau.com/mug. Now, if you're one of my Patreon patrons, don't use that link. Use the link that you'll find in the patrons only post in Patreon. As they say, membership has its privileges. But if you're not a patron, don't worry. writersdetectivebureau.com/mug will get you there. Last week, we talked about dual sovereignty. And if you haven't listened to episode 23, just to catch you up, the concept of dual sovereignty is that you can be charged in both a federal court and a state court for committing the same criminal act. So in that example last week, it was if you rob a bank, you can be prosecuted in federal court for the crime of bank robbery, and you can also be charged in state court under the state's criminal or penal code for the crime of robbery. Now, if you're exonerated in one, meaning that you're found not guilty in, say, federal court, you can still be prosecuted in the other. So you can still be prosecuted for that robbery in state court. And that led us to the topic of double jeopardy. Now, double jeopardy is different, and it is spelled out in the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits anyone from being prosecuted twice for substantially the same crime. What this means is that if you have gone all the way to, now barring that the crime is both a federal crime and a state crime, once your court case has attached jeopardy, meaning you will potentially be facing penalty, then you can not be prosecuted a second time for that crime. So normally this happens when the case has been brought to a jury. And by that, I mean the jury is now in deliberation. So if the jury decides that the defendant is not guilty, the prosecutor cannot file a new charge to try this case again. So to use the O.J. Simpson case as an example, once he was found not guilty for murder, even if new evidence came to light several decades later, the fact that he's already been found not guilty means that he will not face those charges again. The reason I mentioned double jeopardy is because it could actually be a great plot device or a progressive complication for a story that you're telling when you have the knowledge that this rule or law exists. So in 1999, there was actually a movie called Double Jeopardy starring Ashley Judd and Tommy Lee Jones, where obviously, with a name like Double Jeopardy, that's obviously part of the plot. Now, this movie's 20 years old, so spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but I think it's pretty safe to talk about now. But essentially, Ashley Judd's character is set up by her husband to make it look like she killed him. And she gets prosecuted and ultimately goes to prison for his murder. Then, once she's out of custody, having served her time for the murder of her husband, she finds him alive and essentially gets the upper hand on him. And without totally ruining the movie, the question is, if she shoots and kills her husband now, Is she facing double jeopardy because she's already been punished for the murder of her husband? So pretty clever use of double jeopardy as a plot device. So that's one of the reasons why I brought it up, in addition to discussing it along with that dual sovereignty that we talked about last week. So we had two different questions in the Facebook group that popped up this week about the hiring process for police officers in the United States. Now, if you haven't joined the Facebook group yet, please join us. We will get your questions answered. You may or may not end up on the podcast this way, but it's certainly the fast way to get answers for questions you have about your stories. So if you haven't joined the Facebook group yet, please join us. Go to writersdetectivebureau.com/Facebook. That's the simple link to get you to the Q&A group on Facebook to join us. So there are, I think, 3 questions that you answer real quick, and then I will approve you to join the group and you can start asking questions. You can also find the link to the group by going to the show notes at writersdetective.com/24. So the basic hiring process that you go through to become a police officer in the United States goes something like this. You submit a job application when the recruitment period opens. You'll then be invited into a written exam, and it's usually a multiple choice question, like a Scantron type test where you use a number 2 pencil to make your multiple choice answers. There may also be a writing portion. A lot of agencies will have a physical agility test that occurs on the same day. So you take your written exam and your physical agility test on the same day. The physical agility test will include things like a run, an obstacle course, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, a dummy drag of a 180-pound dummy, and your ability to scale a 6-foot fence or wall. Now, if you pass all of those, you will then be invited to what they call an oral board. This is where a panel of officers, usually 3 officers from the department, will ask you questions and they will grade your answers. You can find examples of these questions online. They make test prep books for police officer entrance exams. Some of them may be typical job interview questions like you would have for any career, but there's always going to be scenario-based questions, and there's always going to be at least one that is specifically judging your ethical decision-making. Then the scores from the oral board will be added to the written scores, and the combination of those two will then determine the rank for the overall list of applicants for this recruitment period. And then that top band in that overall group, whatever size that is, will be given background packets, which are in-depth questionnaires about your personal history. So that would everything from listing your neighbors for the last 10 years, your family members, to any kind of driving history, criminal history, history of drug use, where you've lived, where you went to school, who your teachers were, all of those kind of things. Anything and everything will be on that list that they want to know about you. It's a pretty big deal to give you a badge and a gun and the power that comes with this position. So they are definitely going to be digging into your background to make sure that you're worthy of that trust. So once you complete your background packet, you then deliver it to a background investigator, one that's been assigned to you through the personnel unit at the department. And when you deliver that background packet, you're going to go into an interview room and the two of you will sit down and go over every single question. So when you say that you don't have a drug history, they're going to go through every question of, have you ever tried this? Have you ever tried that? How many times did you try this? So it's not just the questions that are, or not just the answers that you gave, but also additional questions to get the most answers. Closest to perfection anyone ever gets is on a job application. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for telling the truth. So the reason that they go over every single question and try to get everything out of you, all of that truthfulness out about, whether you were ever involved in a traffic accident or if you ever tried pot. Those are the things that you want to make sure you are truthful about and that you get out of your system, because most agencies will walk you right down the hall after that, sit down with your background investigator and put you on the polygraph. So you're going to have a polygraph examination immediately after the interview. And those will be questions like, have you withheld any information about your criminal history? Have you withheld any information about your drug use? Those kind of things. Assuming you pass the polygraph, your background investigator now starts digging through your life, going out and knocking on doors and interviewing people. Assuming you pass that background investigation, you will receive a conditional job offer. So what they're really looking for here is for you to agree to accept the job before they incur any more expense, because the next step will be to send you to a psychiatrist for a psychological exam and to a doctor for a medical exam. And the medical exam will include drug testing as well. So if you pass both of those, you will finally join the department. Now, depending on the size of the agency and the rules at the agency, some agencies are so small that they only hire applicants that have already completed a police academy. Those are considered academy graduate applicants. Or you may be hired straight off the street and then paid to go attend the police academy. I was hired as a trainee, and my department paid for me to attend the police academy. Some agencies require you to attend their own police academy. So even if you've been to a police academy and did it on your own, if you apply with an agency that has these rules, like California Highway Patrol, I know, a friend of mine who was a sheriff's deputy for a department in California, then went to the California Highway Patrol. The Highway Patrol made him go through their academy, even though he'd been through a California Police Academy once before. So it really depends on where you apply. But the next step may very well be the police academy if you haven't put yourself through already. And then upon graduating from the police academy, you will get sworn in as an officer and then assigned to a field training officer to complete your on-the-job training. Now, there are many variables to the version of events that I just explained. So there may be steps that are done in a different order. There may be things that are not completed at all. The agency may not have background investigators and may use a private investigator to handle that background investigation. I've seen that once with a friend of mine, actually, that applied for a job that was with an agency that was so small they actually used a private investigator to conduct the background investigation. Some agencies don't use a polygraph as part of their hiring process, and others may not use the conditional job offer. So it will definitely vary based upon agency, and will certainly vary from state to state, and it will be completely different. Well, I shouldn't say completely different. It will be notably different for the federal process if you're trying to become a special agent for a federal agency. But this is pretty typical for at least the police agencies in California. So hopefully that gives you at least a gist of the hiring process. It can take anywhere from 6 months to a year to go through this hiring process, and not including the time that you actually spend attending the police academy or on field training. So once you've graduated the academy and you complete your field training, it's at the 1 year mark when you are off of probation, having graduated from the police academy, that you will get your basic post certificate in the state of California. And when you have that basic certificate, then you can what is called lateral to another agency. So if there is another department that you really want to go work for that has a job opening, you can leave the agency that you're working for currently and go lateral to the other agency. If they, obviously you have to go through that hiring process again. But you won't be treated as if you have never been to the police academy before. So you're not coming in as a civilian trainee. You're not coming in as an academy graduate applicant. You would be coming in as a lateral police officer. And a lot of agencies only hire police academy graduates or lateral officers because they don't have the training budget to send people to the police academy. But for you to get hired as a lateral officer, then that means that you need to have that basic certificate that you only get after completing a full year of service and getting off of probation. And our next question also came from the Facebook group. This one was about arrest warrants and at what point in the arrest process do the police actually go to the district attorney? So there are two types of arrest warrants. Now, this is when you have probable cause to make an arrest, but some time has passed, so this isn't like you just saw this person commit this crime. So by seeking an arrest warrant, there's two ways. The first, in the typical way, the most common way, is called a complaint warrant. And this is where the police officer writes a report or essentially an affidavit, which is an application explaining the probable cause of the crime. And that police report or that affidavit goes from the police department to the district attorney for review. And if the DA decides that they want to prosecute this case and that there is sufficient probable cause, then the DA files a complaint with the court to charge that suspect. Once that happens, if the judge finds there is sufficient probable cause, then the judge will issue an arrest warrant for that person. This process can take anywhere from a day or two up to a week from the time that police report is submitted to the DA until the point where the judge issues the warrant. Now, the other type of arrest warrant is a pre-complaint warrant. This is when time is of the essence. In California, it's called a Ramey warrant, and that name comes from case law set in People versus Ramey in the state of California. But if you Google pre-complaint warrant, you'll find more about what I'm about to talk about. So this is where the police officer authors an affidavit for an arrest warrant and takes it directly to the judge. So they've bypassed the DA. This is, we have sufficient probable cause. I'm putting it in an affidavit and we're going straight to the judge. And once the judge determines that the police do have sufficient probable cause for an arrest, the judge will sign that arrest warrant. This is a lot quicker when it comes to obtaining the warrant, but it requires more steps later on once that suspect has been arrested. I've actually hand-delivered a Ramey affidavit to a judge while he was eating Chinese food with his family at a restaurant. So this is what we go through when time is of the essence and we need to make sure that we can get this guy into custody. The reason why we would seek a Ramey warrant is if we think that this person has fled our jurisdiction. If a crime just occurred and we find the guy, especially if it's a serious felony, obviously we can arrest him right there on the spot. But let's say it's a homicide and we don't know where he is and we want to put the bulletin out, anywhere in the state or anywhere in the tri-state area, wherever you are, for you to have your other agencies, especially out of the state, to make that arrest. It's not as if we just saw this happen and we're going to make an on-view arrest immediately. You need to have a warrant in the system. So that Ramey warrant is the way that you would accomplish that quickly. So I mentioned that there are more steps later on if you seek this pre-complaint warrant. So this brings us to the arrest part. So if you've sought a Ramey warrant and you've arrested the suspect using that Ramey warrant, it's treated just like any other on-view arrest. That means the clock is ticking because you need to get the police report, you need to get that Ramey warrant or that pre-complaint warrant affidavit and the actual warrant itself. All of that needs to go to the DA because the DA then needs to draft the complaint for the arraignment. They need to do their paperwork to present it at the arraignment, which needs to happen before 48 hours or 2 court days is up after his arrest. So the clock is definitely ticking. Now, in the complaint process, the first way we talked about, because the suspect's not in custody, there's no clock ticking yet when it comes to the right to a speedy trial and the right to an arraignment within 2 court days, that kind of thing. So if the suspect was arrested on a complaint warrant, the DA has already done their thing when it comes to filing the paperwork with the court for the arraignment. So all that really needs to be done if it's a complaint warrant, as far as the arraignment goes, is for the suspect to show up, most likely, wearing a jumpsuit and handcuffs, retain an attorney, and then enter a plea. So just to quickly summarize, the pre-complaint warrant is the warrant where you are cutting out the DA in that review process, but the complaint warrant is where the DA is the one that actually obtains that arrest warrant on the police officer's behalf through court. Now, obtaining a search warrant is very similar, where you would draft your affidavit, which is an affidavit is essentially your explanation of the facts, and it's an application. You're applying to get a search warrant, or you're applying to get an arrest warrant. So if you're getting a search warrant, it would be very similar, where you're going to draft that affidavit. You will have the DA review it, and then you will present it to a judge. Now, when you are the author of an affidavit, you're then called an affiant, or I've also heard it pronounced affiant. It's AFFIANT. And what that means is that you are swearing to the judge under penalty of perjury that the facts in that affidavit are true to the best of your knowledge. And if the judge finds that there's sufficient probable cause for a search, then he'll issue the search warrant. Or if the judge finds there's sufficient probable cause for an arrest, the judge will issue an arrest warrant. Now, one important thing to know about a search warrant is that once the judge signs the search warrant, you have 10 days to serve that search warrant. If you haven't served it within that 10 days, it goes stale. So you would need additional facts to explain to the judge why the search is still reasonable and why you still have probable cause, which would mean you would have to go back before the judge to essentially get an extension. So I hope that helps. This seems like a little bit of a criminal justice 101 class this week. Now, before we go, one other thing, I've had a few people ask me about my links. Like when I mentioned the show notes for this episode, it's writersdetective.com/24. Or when I mention going to Patreon, it's writersdetective.com/Patreon. It's specific to a page that's on my website. But sometimes I mention a slightly different link. Like when I mentioned purchasing the coffee mug, that link was writersdetectivebureau.com/mug. Now, if you're using WordPress for your author website, you might be familiar with Pretty Links. That's a tool that allows WordPress users to, you guessed it, make pretty links. Well, I don't use WordPress, so I don't have that option. So I found click.org as a workaround for not being able to use pretty links. So click.org is a tool that allows me to create custom links using a domain name that I own. And they're offering a free 14-day trial. I'm an affiliate for them because I really like how easy it is to use. So if you want to support me by using an affiliate link, you can do that through writersdetectivebureau.com/links, LINKS, to get there instead. Or you can go through just the regular old click.org. But it's a great way to be able to send your readers or your listeners or your viewers to custom branded links. Now, the one thing I should mention is that you'll need a domain name that does not have a website or an email address associated with it. So if your website is johndoeauthor.com, you could then also register johndoebooks.com as the domain you'd use for your custom links. So for me, I use writersdetective.com as the website. That's where my blog is. That's where the show notes are, all of the actual pages and resources that I have for anyone to visit. And then the writersdetectivebureau.com is the custom domain I use for creating all of these custom links. Again, my affiliate link to click.org, which will give you a free 14-day trial without even needing to enter a credit card, is writersdetectivebureau.com/links. So thanks for listening this week. Again, you can find the show notes at writersdetective.com/24. Have a great week and write well.